Welcome, everyone, to our newest episode of our vlog series from the Center for Law and Economics at ETH Zurich. My name is Noah Fehr, and I'm a research assistant at the center, and will be guiding today's conversation. Today, I'm joined by Professor Jacob Goldin from the University of Chicago. Jacob, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Today, we'll be discussing Jacob's recent paper, which is focused on child tax benefits, specifically contingency on whether parents are working or not. A lot of Goldin's research is focused on anti-poverty programs and tax reform. This is closely linked to a lot of the literature that he's published. I think to begin today's conversation, Jacob, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about the context for the paper and the underlying motivation for this research.
Sure. So one of the big debates in economic policy we've been having in the US for the last number of years is about how to design these programs, these benefit programs for kids. And the biggest debate focused around the 2021 expansion to the child tax credit. And the way that credit has worked historically is similar to how other big tax programs for kids work in the US, where the benefits are only available if the parent has income from work. So for a lot of the poorest kids growing up in poverty, they're not actually getting any of these benefits. And the 2021 expansion for the first time increased those benefits for parents, even if those parents were not working. So the big question was whether designing that program in that way would reduce the incentive for parents to work.
A big part of this paper, and I think especially initially, underlies the theoretical framework that supports this debate on child tax benefits. This has been a long-standing debate in the US, and there's a lot of theoretical constructs and ideas that come about. I'm wondering if you could help us understand what the theory is behind this, both for and against contingency on work for these child tax credits.
Sure. Well, like you said, this has been a big question in policy, and even more so in recent years. There's this trade-off where we have so much great evidence in the last decades or so showing really long-lasting, important benefits to kids of transferring more resources into the households where poor kids are growing up. So if you have a child in poverty get more cash into their household, we know that has long-term benefits for the kids' economic outcomes. Down the road when they start working, it has big benefits for health, for educational attainment, college attainment, test scores. And so it seems like a really good idea. And on the other hand, the big concern is that we designed these programs to have a work requirement. One of the major reasons is to give parents an incentive to enter the labor force and to participate in the labor force. And the concern is that if you're able to get these benefits, whether you work or not, then without that thumb on the scale to work, parents will be less likely to enter the workforce and to be employed. So that's sort of the tension, is keeping parents employed in the labor force as opposed to making sure the benefits go to these low-income kids who could really benefit from them.
So moving from the theoretical framing to the empirics of the paper itself, I would love to discuss more in detail the contributions your work makes in terms of methodology. I understand that your paper is using this quasi-experimental setup and looking at a regression discontinuity to understand the changes of what's going on here. I'm wondering if you could help me and the audience understand what's going on in terms of the methodology and what's novel about your approach.
Sure. Well, so the way we're studying this program, what you would ideally like to do is you would ideally like to have a randomized controlled trial where you sort of randomly assign parents to be eligible for this program or not. And what we're interested in learning is whether eligibility for this program, either when there's a work requirement, if that makes you work more, and conversely, if you take away the work requirement, does that reduce the incentive for you to enter the labor force, and do you end up working less? So ideally, we would randomize parents into eligibility for the program or not. Of course, that's not how the world works. And so what we do instead is to take advantage of the timing rules for when kids are eligible to participate in the program. And so kids for this programs that we're looking at across a number of states, they're eligible if they're below the age of 6 at the end of the year. So a kid who turns 6 on December 31st is not going to be eligible for that year, but a kid who turns 6 a few days later, that parent will be eligible for the whole year. And so we can take advantage of that. Basically, though, the idea is that parents whose kids are born on other ends of this age cutoff are going to be pretty similar, we think, to one another on average. And so we could use that variation in when the kid is born as a way to get sort of close to random variation in whether the parents qualify for this credit. And this is known in the literature, the economics literature, as a regression discontinuity design. The thing that we're doing that's newer on the method side is there are a lot of choices researchers have to make for how you design these regression discontinuities, like how close to the cutoff, like do you include only kids born in December and January? Do you include February and November as well? And sort of how do you sort of adjust for differences in when the kids are born? And so what we do is we take advantage of the fact that there are a number of placebo periods where there was no policy in place, and we could use those placebo periods to find the best empirical method where we could sort of most precisely learn the effect of this policy.
So now that we understand the model as well as the methods that you all use, I would love to get into the results. Specifically, what takeaways can the audience find today, and what did you understand to be the effect on labor force participation when these child benefits are conditional or not conditional on working?
Sure. So what you would expect if these programs, if these work requirements really had a large effect on work, is that in states that had a child tax benefit, where there was a work requirement in place, then parents who were eligible for the program would work a lot more than parents who were not eligible for the program. And so we look at mothers and whether they work during the year of the kid. And what we find is really no difference between how much the mothers work when they're eligible for the program versus when their kid is just too old so they're not eligible for the program. And that's when there's a work requirement in place. And we find basically the same story when there's no work requirement in place, when you sort of get this benefit whether or not you work. And so what that tells us, if there's no difference in the effect from whether there's a work requirement or not, that tells us that there's very unlikely to be an effect of this work requirement on whether moms participate in the labor force. So we interpret our findings as a null effect, basically in a precise null, where we could be pretty confident that from our results, we think that there's a very little effect of the policy of these work requirements on whether moms choose to work.
I think it'd be wonderful to understand these results more broadly in the context of their limitations, specifically looking at where we can apply the findings of this investigation and perhaps where there's opportunity for further research.
Well, sure. I think that this is, like you were saying, compelling evidence about this specific context, where we think that state child tax benefits at sort of similar levels to what we see in practice. They're probably not going to cause a lot of moms to exit the labor force, sort of no matter how they're designed. And so what that tells us, it's really nice from a policy perspective. We could give larger benefits to the moms of low-income kids without having to worry that we're going to see this negative effect in terms of moms leaving the labor force. So that's sort of the good news for policymakers. In terms of limitations, again, I think this tells us sort of the most about this specific context, and I'd be more worried about extrapolating to very different sort of programs. So for example, in the US, the Earned Income Tax Credit provides a very large incentives for non-working parents to enter the labor force, and it's much bigger. It could be that these state child tax credits that we're looking at don't play a large role, but it's only because there's also this federal policy. Right. And so I would be more cautious about extrapolating our results to say that big changes in federal benefits, or if you gave, for example, a very large universal basic income to everyone, regardless of whether they worked, I'd be less confident that our results would tell you that there would not be a labor supply effect of those types of policies.
And I think you're kind of speaking to this with, there's great variability in the types of tax credits. There's different sort of distribution mechanisms. I'm wondering for you or for the broader research community, what do you see as next steps? What's future research that needs to be done to continue to answer kind of this longstanding question?
Yeah, and I don't think we're ever going to get sort of a universal answer to this question in all contexts. But what's I hope about sort of future research is that we can, as more states experiment with doing these type of policies, as maybe there's more federal experiments in changing these, we could be sort of confident that there's, at least for a pretty large class of policy reforms, when we're thinking of that trade-off between reducing child poverty and incentivizing labor supply, we have to be less worried about reducing labor participation, and we could be more focused on the child poverty reduction. And so in terms of new evidence, I think looking at these other states and hopefully seeing sort of a consistent pattern across different state experiences and different types of credits will help make us more confident that the story we're finding will continue to apply.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Goldin, for coming in today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
This concludes today's vlog episode with Professor Goldin from the University of Chicago. There's a lot to unpack here, and for further information about Professor Goldin, the University of Chicago, and his research, please feel free to check out our website for more information there. Thank you very much.